Hello, welcome to Bible Guru. Thanks for joining us in a journey through the Bible. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. We are taking a break from our journey through the book of Philippians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and we're going to have a study on the Beatitudes. At the beginning of the kingdom of Israel, we have a story about King Saul, how he got started. 1 Samuel chapter 15. Samuel said to Saul, "Let me tell you what the Lord said to me last night." Saul said, "Tell me." So far, these sound like two elderly Indian gentlemen having a conversation. Samuel said, "Although you were once small in your own eyes, did you not become the head of all the tribes of Israel? The Lord anointed you over Israel, and he sent you on a mission saying, 'Go and completely destroy those wicked people, the Amalekites. Wage war against them until you've wiped them out.' Why then did you not obey the Lord? Why did you pounce on the plunder and do evil in the eyes of the Lord?" Saul said, "But I did obey the Lord. I went on a mission that the Lord assigned me, and I completely destroyed the Amalekites and brought back Agag, their king. The soldiers took sheep and cattle from the plunder, the best of what was devoted to God, in order to sacrifice them to the Lord your God at Gilgal." But Samuel replied, "Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. For rebellion is like the sin of divination, and arrogance like the evil of idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king." Now, let's get back just a couple pages to Genesis chapters 1, 2, and 3. God creates this wonderful, fruitful world out of chaos and emptiness. He then places the first humans in the garden and commands them to be fruitful and multiply. They have just one restriction. Everybody knows you can eat all of the fruit of the garden except just that one tree. They were not supposed to eat from the tree of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. If they had honored God as the source of information about good and evil, they would have obeyed. But as they were tempted by the serpent, they decided maybe they knew better than God what was best. Saul, in this story, is in his position of power, and he felt that he could decide what was best to do rather than simply seeking to obey God. He and the whole kingdom of Israel was better off when he was small in his own eyes. The title of this message is Small. I know we all know what the word means, but I looked up online anyway, and here's what the dictionary says. Small, of a size that is less than normal or usual. Synonyms: little, small scale, compact, bijou, tiny, miniature, mini, minute, microscopic, nanoscopic, minuscule, toy, baby, pokey, cramped, boxy, wee, tiddly, teeny, weeny, teensy, teensy weensy, itsy bitsy, itty bitty, eensy, eensy weensy, pocket sized, half pint, dinky, short, little, slight, slightly built, small boned, petite, diminutive, elfin, tiny, puny, undersized, stunted, squat, stubby, dwarf, bantam, Lilliputian, inadequate, meager, insufficient, ungenerous, not enough, measly, stingy, mingy. 2. Not great in amount, number, strength, or power. 3. Not fully grown or developed, young. 4. Lacking strength and confidence. How is it that we have one word for love, but dozens of words for small? As a species, we seem obsessed with smallness. So, back to the Bible. At the inauguration of the kingdom of Israel, although you were once small in your own eyes, did you not become the head of the tribes of Israel? The context of this exchange between Saul and Samuel is the inauguration of the kingdom of Israel. The context of the Sermon on the Mount is the inauguration of the kingdom of God. One has to do with the Old Covenant, the other has to do with the New Covenant. Jesus starts the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven, by preaching. And his preaching begins with a collection of paradoxical statements about blessedness or happiness. All of them turn our ideas of what makes us happy on their head. As a world society, since ancient times, we have thought of health, wealth, fame, and power as a means to happiness. Jesus taught the opposite. That brings us to Matthew chapter 5. Blessed, or, oh how happy, are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Now here's an outline of the message that is to come. It's small. S-M-A. And we're going to put a little PP in there. Comes out kind of like a smapple. But the PP in music is an indication of the smallest noise you can make. It's very, very quiet. Zechariah chapter 4. God spoke to the king and the priest of Israel and told them, not by might, nor by power, but by my spirit. In that same passage he said, do not despise the days of small things. Mustard seed is tiny. Yet Jesus said if we have the faith of the size of a mustard seed, we can move mountains. In Matthew chapter 13, Jesus gave the parables of the kingdom, in which he described a farmer who plants seeds. Some is eaten by birds, some grows in shallow ground and doesn't last. Some grows in good soil, but weeds choke it out so that it isn't fruitful. And some falls on good soil, where it bears fruit 30, 60, 100 times what was planted. In John chapter 12, Jesus spoke of his impending arrest, trial, death, and resurrection. Unless a seed of grain falls to the ground and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. The Bible encourages us to think of ourselves like seeds. Not big. Small. S for small is small. And then the M, there are two M's. Meek and merciful. We think of meekness wrong. Jesus said, oh, how happy are the meek. We may think that that sounds strange. We equate meekness with weakness, but that's not what the Bible teaches at all. You've heard of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson? He's about an inch taller than me, but I weigh about 210 pounds. Dwayne Johnson weighs 260 pounds, and he has very, very little fat. All the extra pounds are muscle. He's huge and very strong, but when he goes for a walk with his little girl, Jasmine, he bends down and takes her hand and supports her. That's meekness. Strength used to build up. Strength tamed to support and build up others. Strength turned from destructive purposes to constructive purposes, for the purposes of building up and constructing others. Second is merciful. Blessed are the merciful. When we think of mercy, I think of a court of law. Grace is when we receive gifts we don't deserve, and mercy is when we don't receive the punishment that we do deserve. We all love mercy. I want mercy directed towards me. But think about the Lord's Prayer. When Jesus' disciples asked him to teach him to pray, he told them they have to forgive. That's associated. We need to show mercy. Our forgiveness is tied to our forgiving, and in frightening ways. If you don't forgive, you will not be forgiven. In Matthew chapter 18, the parable of the unforgiving servant, Jesus drives home this story of a king who forgives a multi-million-dollar debt. A servant begs that he be released, and he promises to repay everything. Then he goes out and he finds someone who owes him a few $100. He strangles him and demands to be paid back. The debtor begs him to be forgiven and promises to pay back, but the first servant has him thrown into a debtor's prison. When the king hears of this, he's furious. He has the unforgiving servant thrown back in jail and has the one who owed him a few $100 set free. Unforgiveness is like that. The one you refuse to forgive is set free. But you are imprisoned by your lack of mercy. Corrie ten Boom wrote a wonderful book called The Hiding Place, in which she describes the sufferings of her family during World War II. Her parents kept Jews in hiding in their homes, seeking to help them find a way out of the country and avoid the death camps. The Nazi SS agents discovered their secret and threw them all into prison, a death camp, with Jews and others destined by the Nazis for extermination. Corrie's parents and her sister were brutally tortured and killed. By a fluke of administrative error, she was released. After the war, she wrote her book and traveled around to tell the story of God's grace and forgiveness. At a party celebrating her, a man with a heavy German accent introduced himself and said that he was the prison guard who had tortured her and her sister. He said he had since become a Christian and wanted to ask her forgiveness. She hated this man, and the thought of forgiving him disgusted her. Yet she knew that Jesus commanded forgiveness. So she began to reach out her hand and to take his hand and to shake it and to say the words, "I forgive you." And as she did, she described this wonderful warmth that filled her heart. As she obeyed the Lord's command to forgive, he filled her with forgiveness and with mercy. Corrie ten Boom said this: when he tells us to love our enemies, he gives with the command the love itself. So, in our small message, S, small, M, meek and merciful, A, aching. I once attended a funeral. It was heartbreaking. A young man died much earlier than he should have. As they were ready to place the body in the ground, I happened to look up. I looked up at the sky, and there was this beautiful, beautiful rainbow around the sun. And I thought, wow, what a wonderful promise. A symbol of God's promise of hope, as he had done after the flood with Noah. And I told my friend to look up, and he said, what? He said, look up. He looked up and he saw that rainbow, a sign directly from God that there is hope, even when situation seems hopeless. So we can have times when we are deeply aching, and even in those worst times, God can speak to us, he can reach down to where we are, and he can bring us comfort. In fact, it's quite often when we are in the greatest time of grieving that God brings us unexplainable peace that brings us to P. And I know the letter P is not in the word small, but I already told you, in music it means very quiet. The word for pure here means clean, having a clean heart. Yet I think there's more here than just moral character or cleanness. I think it refers to purity of purpose. In Psalm 86, David prays, "Give me an undivided heart." Our hearts can so easily be divided among the collection of drives and motivations. We are multiplicitous beings, our hearts swayed one way one day and another way the next. We want God's will, but we also want things we know are not God's will. I think partly for this reason, the Father in the Proverbs exhorts his Son, above all else, guard your heart, for out of it are the well springs of life. Jesus warned that it is from our hearts that all forms of sin come. It is not, therefore, what goes into our mouths that makes us unclean. It's what comes out. Notice the promise. They shall see God. Purity of heart is required for those who want to see God. Moses saw God. Isaiah saw God. The list of Old Testament people who saw God is pretty short. In the New Testament, we see God in Christ Jesus. If you really want to see Jesus, you have to pursue a pure heart. Second of the P's is peacemakers. The Washington Post published an article on the former President of the United States, Jimmy Carter. I don't care what you think of his politics. What Jimmy Carter has done with his life after the presidency is astounding. He still lives with his wife, Rosalind, in the house they built in the 60s in Plains, Georgia, a small town with a population of just over 700 people. In August of 2018, he taught his 800th Sunday school class since he left office at Maranatha Baptist Church. He said he regrets not doing more to unify the Democratic Party. When Carter looks back at his presidency, he says he is most proud of keeping the peace and supporting human rights. The Camp David Accords that he brokered for peace between Israel and Egypt, and his work to normalize relations with China. In 2002, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts. He is the only president since World War II in whose administration the U.S. was not at war. Whatever your politics, whatever reasons you might come up with that peace in his time was not a good thing, maintaining peace, making peace between and among nations is a great accomplishment by any measure. We've had small, merciful and meek, anguished or aching, peacemakers, and pure in heart. And finally we get to L, longing, hungering and thirsting. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Augustine said this, you make us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they rest in thee. John Piper, meditating on these passages, said it better than I can. God has put eternity in our hearts, and we have an inconsolable longing. We try to satisfy it with scenic vacations, accomplishments of creativity, stunning cinematic productions, sexual exploits, national sports extravaganzas, hallucinogenic drugs, ascetic rigors, managerial excellence, etc., etc., etc. But the longing remains. C.S. Lewis put it this way, if I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. John Piper continues, do you see the structure? The first 4 Beatitudes describe the broken, grieving, quiet person who hungers and thirsts for righteousness. And the next 4 Beatitudes describe the merciful, pure peacemakers who get persecuted for righteousness. Doesn't this structure then give us a definition of righteousness? If we are hungering and thirsting for righteousness, in verse 6, because we are empty, and then we get persecuted for righteousness in verse 10 because we've been filled, isn't it proper to define righteousness as that which we have been filled with, namely mercy, purity, and peacemaking? God places within us a longing for Him, for good, for truth, for beauty, for mercy, for peace. And for those who pursue these things, they will be filled to overflowing with joy and rejoicing, even in the midst of the worst persecutions. Small, meek, merciful, aching, peace, pure, longing, laughing. Jesus said, when we're slandered and persecuted, to rejoice and be glad. Why? Because we're in really good company. That's the way the prophets and, of course, Jesus were treated. We need to think a bit less about ourselves and a bit more about the big picture, one in which we should be happy to be small. Think again of the seed. It's small, yet when you plant it, it dies. It grows into a plant that bears fruit. Each fruit has multiple seeds. Each seed has the potential to become another plant, and more fruit, and more seeds, and so on. Small thing, big impact. Or, Think about a virus. We've been thinking too much about viruses lately. But think about a virus. These things are so small we didn't even know they existed until recently. You need special equipment just to see them. Yet this tiny microscopic entity can ruin your day, impact your life, and in some cases even kill people by the millions. Small thing, big impact. Or think about the weather. Just 1 degree. In the past few months, there have been more destructive hurricanes, tornadoes. Scientists have been predicting such storms would increase in number and in frequency. Why? Because the average temperature worldwide has increased by 1 degree in the past 100 years. 1 degree of temperature change. Small change. Big impact. Or think about the list of heroes in the faith. Hebrews chapter 11, one of my favorite passages in the Bible. I think our favorite characters are the ones who conquered evil enemies or saw amazing miracles, parting the seas, raising the dead, things like that. But honestly, my favorites on the list are the others, the ones at the end, who were tortured. They refused to be released so that they might gain an even better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were put to death by stoning. They were sawed in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. Those were not successful people in the way that we think of success, but they were faithful. Paul understood this, I think. He explained it this way. Even if I should choose to boast, I would not be a fool, because I would be speaking the truth. But I refrain, so no one will think more of me than is warranted by what I do or say, or because of these surpassing great revelations. Therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan, to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, and difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. C.K. Chesterton said it this way. How much larger your life would be if you yourself could become smaller in it. God bless you.